What a wonderful time the 80s were. It was great music, pretty questionable fashion, but for our Australian Socceroos, it was a return to winning ways. It was 40 years ago today that the Australian Socceroos lifted the Merlion Cup in Singapore, 1982. A critical time for our game. There was plenty of change going on, and we're going to get all the behind-the-scenes stories of that tournament. There's a lot about football, but there's a heap that you won't have heard, which is just incredible. This could turn into a complete circus, but we do have an all-star cast in this three-ring circus to take us through it, because it is a time in our history that we're very proud of, and we get to remember it all tonight, because it's a time that Les Scheinflug looks back on with pride. And we are privileged to have the great man here with us today. Les, how wonderful to see you here. You were the first man to captain Australia at a World Cup qualifier, first Australian to score a goal in a World Cup qualifier, but that wasn't the end of the first. You went to many World Cups as a coach.
Yes, 14. I qualified with different national teams 14 times, 3 Olympic Games, captain of Australia. You don't want me to go on. I think I've been 50 years in the game and I enjoyed every moment of it. And we were really in those years when the Merlion Cup was on, we have been on a very low because we didn't qualify against New Zealand. We lost 2-0. And so I became national coach, and that's when I had to produce a few young players into the squad, and that's what happened with us. And we got a free trip to the Merlion Cup. Every expense was paid, because we were broke at that time, so it's been a hard road. And, we only traveled with most probably 16 players, 4 officials, 20 altogether. Now we are traveling with a few more people.
Just a few more, and we are going to hear from some of the key people that were involved with you in that 1982 tournament. We're going to unpick all of those points that you've just mentioned, but sitting next to you is the guy that was your team manager. Now, Stefan Kammert, you first played your football in Leeds with Farnsley Celtic. Then when you came over to Australia in Newcastle, I think at the age of 19, was it the mighty Western Bears that had your talent? 3 titles with them. And since then, I reckon you've held pretty much every position in Australian football, through federations, up to the board of Football Australia, and everything in between, CEOs of clubs. It's great to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Terrific.
Now, on our screen at probably in about 10 minutes' time or so, we're going to have one of the wonderful players, the great John Kosmina, joining us, who was team captain. But let's go to the equal top goal scorer, who is on Stefan's right. And Dave Mitchell, what a wonderful career. You had pretty much a pioneer in the way that you went overseas, and of course starting your football overseas, but then you came back here and NSL, should I say, under-21 Player of the Year, and then extraordinary Eintracht Frankfurt, Chelsea, Feyenoord, just to name a few. But you were in wonderful goal-scoring form at this Merlion Cup, and it's great to have you here with us as well.
Thanks, Stefan. A pleasure to be here.
Great to see you. Now, next to you is a gentleman who won't remember the Merlion Cup of 1982 for a very good reason, but a former youth international, and made his way up through senior executive levels at the AFC, at FIFA, and at the City Football Group. And of course, since January 2020, has been the CEO of Football Australia. James Johnson, great to have you here.
Thanks, Steph. Great to be here.
And I'm going to say you were 5 months old, correct, when that Merlion Cup was lifted?
I was 5 months old when the... That's right. 1982, that's right.
So let's perhaps not quite ask you for your memories of that tournament right at the moment. Perhaps, Les Scheinflug, what do you remember of the entire tournament? What was the feel? As you said, you had a mix of youth and experience, an invitation to play. Was that something out of the ordinary?
Yes, it's never been done before, really, for the Australian team. We went on invitation, and we didn't know the opposition, how good they are. We had no videos. We had nothing about the teams. And all we knew is that they're very fast players. They play in their own country. And we knew the referees won't be on our side, because we had the big boys from England, from Australia. We are taller than them, stronger than them, fitter than them. And every 50-50 decision didn't go our way. So we had to really play hard to win this tournament.
And what was the professionalism of the tournament like? We watch how slick tournaments are now, and as you mentioned, there's a heap of staff and there's all sorts of arrangements in place for the players and five-star hotels. What was it like for your side?
It was very well, but I mean, there's one thing I pride myself off, and the players come back from Europe and say thank you for teaching us discipline on and off the park. And the discipline was excellent with Australian teams, which I looked after. And in the Merlion Cup was the same. They did their job on and off the park. They behaved themselves well on the plane, off the plane, in the hotel, and played soccer to the best of their ability. And they were mates. They grew together as mates by being together in a hotel, five-star hotel. This was something which they were not used to. We used to travel cattle class, right? And stay in a two-star hotel, right? And this one was something special. And I loved it, and the people really liked us, the way we applauded the crowds and the way we behaved ourselves. Special.
And one of your key staff members was Stefan Kamers. Stefan, you wore many hats though. Was team manager just one of your roles?
Yes, I was actually the head of delegation, but because the then Australian Soccer Federation was not prepared to outlay any money for any additional staff, I also became the team manager. So I had to do all the paperwork as well. And I met Les 12 months before when I was involved with the World Youth Cup in Newcastle. But I still had to gain his confidence, so to speak, which hopefully I was successful in doing, because he's still talking to me after 40 years. But it was a terrific job, and it was a very well-run tournament by the Football Association of Singapore. They did a magnificent job, and it was a pleasure being there.
Your team captain for this tournament, gents, was the man with the flowing blonde locks, the mighty John Cosmina, who I'm delighted to say is joining us. He's back at his home in Brisbane, so hopefully we're going to be able to bring him up on the screen here. Why did you select Cosy as captain, Les?
He was a national team player before under Rudy Gutendorf. He was a top goal scorer for Sydney FC, Arcoa at that time. And he deserved everything. He was one of the better strikers, you understand, and mostly number one in Australia.
And this is what we call John Cosmina, larger than life. Cosy, how are you? Great to see you.
Good, Steph. Hi, guys.
Cosy, was the budget too tight to fly you here?
Yeah, I know, it's Harry. Harry's always been a tight ass.
The great Harry Michaels, who's brought us all together here for this one. Cosy, it's so good to see you. I've got to admit that when I spoke to John Cosmina about the Merlion Cup in 1982, he said his memory was a little bit vague. Tell us, what do you recall of that tournament? You know you won it, right?
Not a great deal, to be honest. I saw the video that Steph sent up the other week, and that Stefan, not Steph, you're Steph. Stefan sent up the other week, and it did bring back some memories. Look, it was really tough. It was a tough tournament because the conditions were difficult, because it was, you know, hot and sweaty, obviously. We were a fairly new sort of squad. We didn't have a lot of time to prepare. We were off the back of an NSL season just then. And so we had to get over there and get the job done. It was all new. It was new to everybody. It was the first time a lot of us had actually been together as a group. I do remember, and you may have touched on it in your intro there before, the corruption issue. And I remember we had a security guy that sticks in my mind. And the thing that sticks in my mind the most was that we'd sat down for the first meal, and he joined us all the time, and he ate the eyes out of a fish, and we found that a bit unusual at the time. But but basically we had a lot of fun, and that's probably the important thing.
And Cosy, you were, of course, one of the tournament's top scorers. Equal top scorer Dave Mitchell is here with us. Mitch, you had a super tournament, but am I correct in thinking that Les actually didn't play you for all the matches?
Yeah, he didn't play me the first game for some reason. You know, I've still got to pick him on. I don't know why, but
Not good enough.
The reason was because there was a lot of young players coming into the team, and he wanted to blend it. You know, so you know, myself, Steve Blair, Peter Raskopoulos. We're getting introduced from the successful 81 World Youth Cup that we had. And the team hadn't done well. So the thing about Les' success, he knows the DNA of Australian footballers. So I think that's part of his success. And he understands that we probably aren't technically as good as a lot of the South Americans and Southeast Asians and Europeans, but we've got a lot. We're winners. We want to win. And that's what he referred to about being bigger and stronger and faster. And we were successful. And it was great to win the tournament. And it was great to be joint, top scorer, I think, with Cozzy. So it was great.
Yeah, absolute super result. And of course, the Socceroos would go on to win back-to-back Merlion Cups a year later. James Johnson, as I mentioned, and I promise not to bring it up again after this, but you were still running around in short pants at this time, or perhaps even still in nappies at the time. But would you say, in reflection, that this was the precursor to what we now know as that incredible tournament, the Asian Cup?
It absolutely is. And I think it was incredible foresight by our coaches, like the boss, Les Scheinflug, like our administrators, Stefan at the time, and our players. The Merlion Cup has effectively become the Asian Cup. And the Asian Cup today in 2022 is really central to Football Australia's high performance strategy, because our teams are playing against some of the best in the world, the Japans, the Koreas, the Irans, and also on the women's sides, the Japans, the Koreas, the Philippines, the Thailands. We're playing at youth level in Asia. And I think decisions like the one taken in 1982, yes, the year I was born, are some of the decisions that have led us to where we are today. And that's where our future is. So it's where our history was, and these sorts of decisions have led us to where we are today and where we're going in the future.
Les, I think we've got some pictures of the team walking out at this tournament, and you can see the difference. Of course, we're back in the short shorts and the retro strips, which I absolutely love. I think that kit was amazing, with all due respect to our current sponsors. But we can see just the wonderful energy about this side, and they look like a great bunch of lads. But Mitch referred to the fact that you had the experience with the youth. Was that a time of rebuilding, do you think?
Yes, like I said before, we lost against New Zealand with the senior team for the World Cup. And I had to build the team, which I believed I had time for 2 years to build a new team completely. And I thought by having just a certain amount of talent, new talent in there, was the best way to go. So the rest were all experienced first-grade players and national team players. And when they played, like Cozzy said, the heat, thinking about the heat was like Bangkok yesterday, you understand, when it's really hot. And you have to be very careful when you train in the morning or what time in the afternoon, because you had no strength left after. But no, it was a tournament which we knew the players can do certain jobs. They were friends, not teammates, more friends and teammates. And they wanted to win this tournament. And that's the first time away from home. Can you imagine from a 2-star to a 5-star hotel and what it means? And in '82, we had Andrew Lederer, the vice president of ACOA. He was in charge, and he was Cozzy's boss at that time. He was very good to you, Cozzy. He used to pay you cash money. No?
That was a year after, with 83.
83, yeah.
Stefan was the boss in 82.
Yeah, that's right. But
Steve. Was it Steve Kamaz?
Steve.
Yeah, we're going to hear the story behind the Steve Kamaz shortly. Cozzy, you mentioned that you felt this was a regeneration of the Socceroos, the start of the next generation, if you like?
Yeah, look, you put young players, George Christopoulos went. I mean, Georgie, for me, was a great player that probably never had the football career in this country that he deserved. But I think he got wrapped up in business and things like that as well. But there were a lot of good players that came through that system. I mean, we saw, Mitch was obviously starting out. I think you were at Sydney City at that stage, Mitch, and you were about to embark overseas, weren't you?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
I
started at Adelaide City, and then I moved over to Sydney City. Yeah, because I wanted to play with Cozzy. See.
So there's a lot of younger guys were coming through. It was experimental. I mean, I was involved for a short spell with that failed '82 campaign for the World Cup when we were there, Les, at the SCG that day. We got knocked out by the Kiwis. And it had to, now was the time to freshen it up. And Les did the right thing and picked a lot of new faces, because you've got to see how they go. I mean, it's easy. Well, it's not easy. It's okay to be a good club player, but playing in a national team is a completely different kettle of fish. And it requires a different mindset and mentality, and you've got to get that sorted out. No point in throwing a bunch of guys together at the last minute and hoping they're going to do the job. So we had time to do it, and that's what was started there. So it was great being part of it.
I actually just wanted to test your memory, Cozzy, to see if it was accurate, because we actually have an interview done with you about this squad, and we'll take a look at that now. This is an interview with team captain John Cosmina at the 1982 Merlion Cup.
Team captain John Cosmina looks at it from a different viewpoint.
As far as our chances for the World Cup are concerned, I don't think there's much of a relationship, but as far as building a team for the next World Cup is concerned, I think it's got a great deal of reference. We're trying to get a squad together now that will last for the next 4 years. Build a good basis for a team, and to win this cup would be a good start. It'd restore a little bit of prestige to Australian soccer, which was sort of slightly demoralised after our exit from the last World Cup.
Gents, he hasn't changed a bit, right? You look at that fabulous lush head of hair, he still looks the goods. Mitch, what did you make of...
It's a wig.
A few more creases that weren't in that picture.
And I'm loving the 80s perm on your interviewer as well, Cozzy. Mitch, you were the ones that came in.
Still got it.
You were one of the ones heading overseas, a bit of a pioneer at the time in that field.
Yeah, look, I mean, growing up in Adelaide, we were immigrants, come over when I was 6 years old, but loved the game and played in Adelaide. And then I moved to Sydney City to play with the best club in Australia at the time. They were winning trophies, and my end goal was to be overseas and play, So playing for the national team, thanks to Les and the Australian youth team, where we played against the world's best, and we defeated them, defeating Argentina. So it was my goal to end up overseas, and lucky enough, I went to Glasgow Rangers to start with in 1982-83, and from there headed to Germany, then into Holland, and it was difficult those days to come back and play for Australia because there wasn't, as you mentioned, FIFA dates. It was very difficult. So to combine that, playing with the club and national team.
Yeah, Jojo, we talked about this squad. They had the challenges being brought together, and of course they had different constraints, particularly financial. But going with 4 staff, how good would that be now? That's so cheap.
It would be great on the budget. But that's certainly not the case in 2022, Steph.
100% isn't. But
and couldn't be. That wouldn't work.
Stefan, we've also got some interviews from you, and this one is you as a team manager actually talking about what you think the game in Australia needs. Let's have a listen.
Team manager Steve Kamars.
The facilities here are first class. I mean, the National Stadium is one of the most magnificent stadiums I've ever seen. And even the training facilities that we have here are very good indeed. I mean, this stadium here would rank as being one of the better ones in Australia.
Steve, can I ask, was that an ossification? Like, could Australians just not wrap their head around Stefan?
My father's name was Stefan. I was Stefan. So when Mum decided she was going to chastise one of us, I became Steve. My father became Stefan. So there was no confusion about who was copying it at the time, right? When I came to Australia, Steve stayed with me for many, many years. And I have to say that when I joined the National Soccer League in 1982, I decided that I should leave Steve because there were certain prejudices against the sport and the multicultural side of the sport. And so I still was known as Steve. But when I left football in the mid-90s for a while, Stefan came to be introduced.
Now, my mail says that you were called Big Steve.
When I was playing for Western, the local newspaper, the Cessnock Eagle, referred to me as Big Steve, yes.
Nice one.
Look at you now.
Harsh, Les. You spoke about the need for stadiums, for sponsorship, for funding for the game. How much do you think's changed? We're still talking about all of that.
We are to some degree. There's no doubt that there's more money that is coming into the game now through sponsorship. And the current administration under James are doing a terrific job with what they're able to generate. We still need more, but as it was in those days, the amount of publicity that we were generating through mainstream media was not particularly at a high level. And you needed that to be able to generate the sponsorship. So it was like a dog chasing its tail. And that still happens to some degree now, because we're still seen, if you like, as a poor cousins of AFL and rugby league. But it would be fantastic if the media could really understand what they could achieve with this game if they really got behind it. And so in some respects it hasn't changed, but it is in a much better position now than it was in those days.
James, do you get deja vu watching that interview with Steve?
Yeah, look, I think Steph and Steve articulated it well. I think where we are today is we've gone through a process over the past couple of years where we've tried to really bring together what I think are the two strongest aspects of the sport, the national team brands on one side, both men and women now, and also our community. And I think when we put the national teams in our community as the front shop window of the sport, that's where we're going to see the mainstream success, as Stefan talked about. And also that's where more revenue is going to come into the sport. Because the reality is, while we might not be able to compete today, week in, week out with club football, we can when it comes to two national teams, not just one, and also the big community that we have. That's where the strength of our sport is. And that's where I see the commercialisation of our sport in the coming years coming from.
And it's interesting, isn't it, when we look at the transition through, because you're sitting next to, well, virtually next to one of them, but three gents who came through playing and have gone on to coaching, and of course Stefan, who's gone all through the sports governance levels as well in our game. Mitch, you went from player all the way through to the top of the game, both here and overseas, and you also have that experience that Cozzy has had in coaching in the current modern day A-League. What have you seen change?
Yeah, well, it's a big question, right? So, yeah, look, the game has got more media. Back in the days when Foxtel was doing it, it was really well, but Paramount's not gone so well, to be truthful. So we just got to get out there and play and be competitive. And obviously with the national team qualifying for the World Cup, that's going to give us more exposure in the world football and get more people watching it. And the more that happens every year, unfortunately, in Cozzy's in my era, it didn't happen so much. So we just fell short all the time of qualifying for the World Cup because it made it so difficult for us. But when we do that qualify, and we get the big sponsors want to come in and be part of that World Cup. The World Cup, the Women's World Cup's held here next year, which is a fantastic job of FFA getting, with James getting it over the line and being held here in New Zealand. So that's when real sponsors want to come in, and that's where the money's going to come from. And for the local league and the community sport that we've got, the game's just growing and it's bursting, but we don't have enough facilities for kids to play, and that's part of the problem. We need more councils to get out there and help the development of the game, because we need more grounds to play at.
Hashtag equaliser, that's what we're doing. We're getting more grounds out there for our female players, because we're expecting a huge boom, of course, in playing. But I want to ask you about the styles of play, because at this Merlion Cup, as I mentioned, you were equal top goal scorer. We've got some vision of one of your goals in the final, a fantastic diving header. Is that just vintage Mitch for you?
Well, I was always known for a good header of the ball. The good thing is we played some good football. The ball get played forward. And I think it was a corner we ended up having. And from the corner, I came in and had a diving header. So it was. I think it's going to be coming up soon. So it comes out wide here, and here it is. And I come in late and diving header and scored. Yeah, so a well-timed run, and it was a great goal. And it was the second goal of the game, so it put us 2-0 up, I think, and gave us a big advantage to go on and get the third and then win the game.
To make it 3-1 2 minutes later. Made it 3-2 from a free kick.
I mean, back then South Korea were one of the major forces in Southeast Asian football, and for us to go and beat them in that sort of temperature and the conditions were very difficult, it was a great feat for us to establish the Socceroos or Australian football in Asia.
Yeah, as we heard there on the commentary, it was a 3-2 win to the Socceroos, who would go on to repeat that feat. Les Scheinflug with you as coach the following year, but you had such an eye for youth talent. Now, many moons ago, you had one young James Johnson in your Joey's team. Did you have any inkling at that time that you were coaching someone that was going to run the game?
Do I have to talk about it? No, James was very fast. He was a good midfield player, and unfortunately got hurt before we played Argentina in the last practice game. He would have been in the final squad, so he was a good player. So he deserved to be in there. And there's another first captain, first World Cup goal scorer. They're the first coach who got produced CEO.
I wonder if that's going to be added to your CV and your Hall of Fame citation. Which begs the question, James, you went and played for the Strikers and you returned there when one John Cosmina was coach. Cosy, you didn't pick him. What were you missing?
He was injured.
Lucky you say that.
No, look, I had a lot of young players in that team. And Jamie, you know as well as anybody, mate, when you pick a team, whether it's business or football, you've got to find the right balance. And I had a stack of young blokes in there already. Jade North, Matt Mackay, Wayne Shrow, Shane Stefanuto. Needed a little bit of experience. And it's just balance, matter of timing, I guess.
Well, James, you get right of reply. Was that your recollection of how that unfolded?
No, I've got a lot to thank Cosy for. I think Cosy was always very honest to me and I always appreciated that. I always wanted to become part of the first team at the Strikers, and I was in the youth team. I'd train with Cosy. But he always said to me, look, you know, it's not, you're not going to get time here in the first team, and you're a smart kid, you should focus more on university. And that's actually what I did. So I have Cosy to thank for a lot of the academic success that I had after football.
And that's important, Steph, because no, that's important. Not really, because
you've got a good point.
No, it's very important because a lot of coaches would say, "Look, if you stick around and do this and do that, and maybe in a couple of months we'll and tag you along," when they've got no intention of actually playing the player or whatever. So to be told there and then, look, things aren't going to work for you. I've got too many to pick, and you best go on in other endeavours, and that's exactly what you have to. You have to be tough to be. You have to be cruel to be, successful here, I think, in this instant. Yeah, and I think that's exactly what happened. And it's worked out. Exactly.
So, James, would you then say that we can use the quote, John Cosmina made me a lawyer?
Was that a lie or a lawyer? Did you say?
No, FIFA was afterwards.
I get mixed up with this.
So, Cosy, you can take full credit for that. Mitch, you mentioned the importance of giving players other opportunities. Just describe for us what it was like for you as an overseas player coming back. Do I recall a story where you actually traded a plane ticket with a backpacker?
Oh, well, that was years. That was early years when I went on trial. I spent $30,000 buying my own contract at Hakoa to go back because I did a deal with Frank Lawyer that if we win the championship, I could buy my transfer fee back because he paid $35 for me from Adelaide, and he said, yeah, fine. So I paid him $30,000 and I went on as a free player to Rangers so that the club couldn't ask for $100,000 when I was there. And I had no money left, so I went and got a pommy that was over here and I got a back. You could never do it these days, but it was like, a backpacker's ticket back to, and he gave me his passport. He came to the airport, he put the bags on the scales and through baggage, put his passport on there, and I got the ticket and then went through immigration. And then I sent his passport back to him when I got back to Glasgow. So I was, look, it's unbelievable. It's an unbelievable story, but yeah, you never get away with it these days.
You can still be arrested for that.
But Mitch,
AFP will be out the front, Mitch, when you finish.
That was 35 years ago, so it's like...
Because he's actually texting them off screen. You can rely on that. Tell us, though, about the travelling back when there were no FIFA windows, because now, of course, we have these windows which allow our players to travel. And we talk about how under stress they are because they fly in, they play a few games, and it's all it's quite compacted, and we're asking a lot of them physically. What was your experience with coming back when there were no windows?
Well, it was a different era then, obviously, and now they have FIFA dates, right? So it's a little bit easier for the players to come back and they fly business class. So back in my day, or our day, I guess the FFA didn't have money, so the flight would be economy, and you've got to squeeze it in between games, you know, and it. And when you're signing with clubs, they said, well, hang on a minute, you're a national team player, so you're going to go back and play for Australia? So it's quite difficult in those days to come back and play for your national team, and particularly if you're playing against Fiji or you're playing against Tahiti or the smaller nations in the so-called World Cup. And, you know, you're playing against Bayern Munich, or you're playing against PSV Eindhoven, or you're playing against Celtic, or you're playing against Tottenham. It was very difficult for you to go and leave those games and come back and play. So thankfully, and that all started happening once South Americans started to come to Europe because they had to go back and play in their World Cup games. So in Australia or in Asia, it wasn't looked as so important to European teams, but as soon as the South Americans had to go back and play, then FIFA had to act and work on something where a FIFA date would work for the players, and that sort of helped our players come back. So, yeah, it was very difficult at the time.
So, Liz, when you bring a player back from overseas for one of these windows against a nation that you are probably going to have a cricket score against, are you obliged then to make sure that they play?
I wouldn't bring him back against a team like that. But
You would have brought me back, Les, surely.
yeah,
Come
but
on.
not against Samoa or Fiji or something like that. I think it has to be worthwhile if you play in a World Cup qualifier,
Yeah.
right? And let's go back to the other aspect. Australian youth football was that highly done. We had institutes in Canberra, institute in Queensland, institute in WA, New South Wales, and we produced young players. We stopped doing that, and now we have to start doing it again because coaches from all over the world come to see what we were doing to have a ranking of 5 and 7 in FIFA at one stage. And I think this is the big minus we have got in the moment. We cannot have academies only with Sydney FC and those I-League clubs. And it must be run by the FFI again, you understand? And produce and put coaches in there who were ex-players, not school teachers. That's the biggest problem we got in Australian football. School teachers, they're good on the whiteboard, good on the computer, but can they play? Let me look on the ground. No. So this is a problem we have got in the moment still. But now for the first time we got one under-17 coach who played for Australia in Portugal. Right? He's under-17 coach. We got young players like what's his name in Brisbane, the striker. He was at the game in Brisbane. Anyhow, he was a striker, played in the institute. And what's the name? Jade Norse. So all people involved in the game now, you see. We need people like that to help the youngsters. And because we're paying them $20,000 a year, can they live from that? We have to, youth coaches have to be the top paid coaches in the moment, right? Until we are ready to go on with the job again.
I'm going to let one Tom Samani know what you said about school teachers because I'm sure he'll be very keen
Tommy
to.
used to play under me in Marconi, so.
Well, he's unique because he's a bit of both, right? So
He's
got a foot in both camps, so he can't lose.
And he's a Scot, so there's
more-
bias as well.
How many more school teachers you got to play I-League? You mentioned a few.
Okay, fair enough.
you know
John
a few?
Cosmino, were you a school teacher?
No, I actually was going to be, but I packed it in. I didn't finish yet, Jamie. I should have taken a leaf out of my own book. No, look, Les has got a point, but just thinking of school teachers, Steve O'Connor was a school teacher, Les. He was one of your favourites, Mitch.
Yeah,
There's an example.
Who else was a school teacher? I know Peter Fedenick went on to become a lawyer, quite successful as a lawyer, and he had a good national team career as well for a short while. Great NSL career.
I'm talking about coaches.
So I think life back then was a lot more simple. You could go to university and play football and get away with it because the game wasn't professional. Now it's a little bit different. There's a lot of things to be considered. It's easy to say, yeah, we've got a million, whatever it is, Jamie, kids playing the game, but does that actually translate into the dollars and cents? How many, and I work a lot with kids, a lot of kids that play the game now won't be playing it in 5 years, and they won't translate into supporters either. The biggest problem we got with our game is it's actually easy to play, and it's a great sport for kids to be able to join in. But whether they stick with it or not, it's a different kettle of fish. Producing players at the top end to get them, spitting them out like we used to in the old days, we don't get to Europe as quickly as we used to, or as easily, because whether that be Britain or mainland Europe, because the game's opened up. Mitch, you mentioned South Americans, you've got Africans in there as well. With the EU, it changed a whole lot of things as well, and a lot of players started to move around, so it became increasingly difficult for Aussies to get a look at. And you even look at how quickly it's changed since our golden generation left the AIS in the mid-90s or the early 2000s, and then went to Europe and had reasonable careers. Now it's a lot different. How many players we got in the EPL now?
Yeah, no,
how many players we got in Serie A?
Yep.
La Liga, it's, we could count, you needed both hands to count the players in those competitions. Now you can do it in one hand.
Well, you're talking about the Premier League. There's not many English players playing in the Premier League either. There's some also, it's a reality when you look at it. And that's a problem for the English national team.
I think we have to stay positive. If we want to improve football in this country, we have to start with the young kids. You understand? And spend some money there with the young kids and get the good coaches with them. There's no such thing that we can't go back to the level where we were before. When you talk about old soccer, new soccer, soccer doesn't change. The ball is round. It's just how often you use it and how you love the game. You see, if you love the game, you can reach anything. The same with the young kids. You give them the best tracks, the best soccer ball. If they don't want to play, they don't play and they don't practice.
Cozzy, you're one of those that Les mentioned before that should be involved in the coaching, as a player at the highest level, and you and Mitch, of course, both coached at A-League level. What have you noticed in the difference since those days that you and your teammates were playing in Singapore at the Malayan Cup, and those were the days when kids would have a ball and they would kick it all the way to school, and that went through till the likes of the Harry Kewells and those sorts of players who said he just always had a ball at his feet every second of the day. What's the change you've seen?
Les mentioned school teachers, and it's difficult because you have got a lot of coaches in the system these days that never really played at a high level, and you got that argument. You don't have to be a good player to be a good coach, but I think you've got to understand the fundamentals of the game. And I look at and I work with a lot of kids. I coach at a school, private school. I've been there for 5 years, coming up 6 next season. I've done a bit of work with one of the local community clubs here. With a mate of mine that played NSL for Brisbane City. And it's interesting looking at the kids. They can't pass the ball properly, but they can do a rainbow flick. Like, where's the common sense in that? It's the little things that are wrong. You talk about school teachers, science, so much science and technology involved in the game these days, yet there wasn't 20, 30, 40 years ago. Yet, where'd all the good players come from with all that science and technology? Where'd it come from? It's become from because they had a love of the game, and because guys like Harry had a ball at his feet, he would have gone to sleep with a ball. Harry would have had a ball between his feet when he went to bed at night. That's why he was as good as he was. And I mean, the other thing as well is, like, someone like Harry is born. You don't create a player like Harry. For me, he inherited a gift, and he made the most of it as well. So there's a lot of little things that I think you have to look at that are going to change the game here and create better players. But I'll throw this one to you, Jamie. When do we get a National Youth League back? Because you go back, Les, to the 90s, and you mentioned the AIS, and the AIS team used to blitz the National Youth League back in the early 90s, right through to till the NSL finished up 2003, I think it was. So you get a good youth league with kids playing 30, 40 games a year. That's what's going to make better players.
And also, I forgot to mention, with younger kids, we got coaches also think of getting them fit. They're fitness coaches, not soccer
Come on,
coaches.
Les, give us a break.
Fitness coaches. You give them.
Hammer us at training.
No, what is it?
But that's what his point is. It's
but
coaches
you're older.
doing it.
You're much older than. I'm talking about young kids, from when they start from 6 years on to about 10. Give them the ball, let them enjoy themselves, let them make mistakes. What do? They put 20 cones on that side, 10 cones on that side for a few sticks, and make them do that instead of giving them the ball and let them enjoy themselves.
Ah,
That
big
is a
balls and
difference.
cones. Yes.
And Cosy in it fast. I might you run, but you run a lot with the ball. That's why you scored so many goals.
I mean, Cosey's right, because I do some work at Knox Grammar and Linfield and North Shore here, and it's like a scenario where he's right. They would rather do the rainfall pitch, and would they go and watch an A-League game? They wouldn't go, you know, and they love the game, they play the game, but it's not in their DNA to go to the games, and it's trying to get them to go there. You know, and I think going back to the point where the gap that's happened, you talk about an A-League coach, you earn so much in Australia, if you lose that job, the next job you get is going to be like 5 times less money. And so they want to play with players that have played in the A-League and don't give young players enough chances to play. And that's part of the problem with the AIS. That gap was filled with AIS players coming into the NSL, and the NSL probably weren't as fit or professional as the A-League. So the A-League's expanded and gone further away, and they're having all their elite academies, and the AIS isn't there anymore. So you've got all these players with a big gap. You know, they're playing at club level, but the coaches don't give. There's so many players that don't get a chance, you know, at Western Sydney Wanderers or at Sydney FC or Perth Glory when I was there. You have to pick between 1 or 2 players, and if you pick one player and he does well, the other player might go and play in State League and never gets a career again. And I had that. You know, it's a situation where coaches have got to be very careful what they do with players and picking them.
David, you did get my point. What I'm trying to say, from 6 years till about 10, don't give them the counts, don't give them the sticks, let them play with the ball.
Of course, yeah, no, sure.
And the more they play
Don't
with the
coach
ball,
them.
the more they enjoy coming to the game.
Absolutely,
and
no, I agree
training,
with that,
right?
totally, yeah.
But you see so many school teachers, I got a book, count here, 20 counts there, 3 sticks there, and that's what happened.
But that's where self-taught sometimes. Let people have the self-taught, let them play, let them have the freedom. But then there comes a point when you need a bit of structure, you know, and that might be from 12 onwards or whatever.
Yes,
But initially, let them play with the ball, you know, and let them express themselves. And that's the thing, expressing themselves.
So, James, you've seen both sides of this conundrum. You grew up in the era where there was an AIS. And I don't know, who was your idol in the Australian team growing up?
Oh,
Don't
Frank
give it up.
Farina was
Yep.
someone I looked up to as a Queenslander, and not just a Queenslander, someone from the country part of Queensland, Frank Farina. Yeah.
So were you one of those kids that had a ball at your feet and you were imitating your heroes and went to watch and came through that scenario?
Yeah, growing up in Rockhampton, it was always a case of really connecting with players from the regional parts of Australia that had ended up in the senior national team. So anytime there was an opportunity to watch the young Socceroos or the under-23s or the Socceroos in Brisbane for me, my family and I would travel up to watch the team. We would travel down to Brisbane to watch Brisbane United play in the NSL, and then later the Brisbane Strikers. So I think it was extremely important to have these sorts of mentors and people that you could aspire to being, particularly growing up in the regional part of Queensland.
So to Cozzy's point about a National Youth League and about the AIS, and you have worked all over the world with City Football Group, Asian Football Confederation, and of course your role at FIFA.
Yeah.
So you've seen a lot of programs. What can we do better?
Yeah, look, I think it's a package of measures. I don't think there's any one thing that's going to solve player development. I think the first thing for me is we need to resource our youth national team programs better than we ever have. This year, the FY23 budget for Football Australia will invest more in youth national team programs for men and women than we ever have in the history of the sport. So that's something we can do now as a consequence of bringing revenues into the sport. We have to invest. And that investment means that we can have more national team youth camps. It also allows us to appoint a suite of coaches. So for the first time in many, many years, we have Arnie as our Socceroos coach. We have Tony Vidmar as another 23 coach, which is separate from the Socceroos. We have Trevor Morgan, who's the under-20s coach, and we have Brad Maloney, another former Socceroo, who's the entry point to our national team programs with the under-17s. And we have the same on our women's side as well. So resourcing our national teams appropriately is important. We've appointed a chief football officer in the past 6 months. Ernie Merrick has come on board, and we're asking him to look at competition structures, as Cozzy mentioned, around national youth teams and also national youth championships, and also the coaching side of the game as well, because we need to also teach coaches as well as players to be as efficient as we can when it comes to player development. And then we've got competition structures and transfer systems. And this is part of a strategy that we're implementing at the moment. We're halfway through the implementation of a transfer system. And one of the core reasons we do it is because ultimately we want to incentivize clubs to develop players. And as the boss mentioned, we have to go beyond just the 11 Australian A-League clubs to develop players, because the reality is we're competing against the Japans and the Koreas that have 20, 30, 40, 50 clubs that are developing players, and we need to do that. And then there's a second tier that we're talking about. We're in the process of bringing this to life. We'll put out an EOI, expression of interest, for clubs that are interested in participating in this competition very soon, and it will have a very big focus on youth development, so that players who may not be ready to play in the A-League have a place to play, and that would be for many younger players, so they get more match minutes at critical ages of development.
As in replacing an official National Youth League?
I wouldn't say it would replace. The National Youth League sits with the APL and the A-League. That's something we've agreed with the league, but we need to, as a governing body, we need to do other things in addition to the NYL, and a second tier transfer system, the appointment of a full suite of coaches, a chief football officer, and a big investment in youth development programs are decisions we're taking today that hopefully we'll see the benefit of, not tomorrow, but in 5 to 10 years' time.
Stefan, Big Steve Kamatz, you still with us? Now, I've let you slide under the radar thus far. Your thoughts on this, because you've seen that too, from playing through to the governance level.
Yes, look, I think when the National Soccer League ceased and the new A-League commenced, we had a situation where there was no National Youth League, as we've said, and the focus was just on one team at the senior level nationally. So, what existed before was no longer there. The Institute of Sport was no longer there. A lot of the state institutes were no longer there. So the players that came through that system weren't coming through anymore. And there was limited opportunities for them to play at the top level in the A-League. So there's a combination of those reasons as to why, we don't have a golden generation coming through at the moment. However, with the introduction of the A-League academies, James's second division, then we're starting to, and I hope that something happens with the National Youth League as well, under the A-Leagues, because we need these kids to have an opportunity for the best to play against the best, so that they can come through the system and we get back to producing another golden generation. So I think it's just starting now, yeah.
Go, Cozzy.
I think, and I've had a number of discussions about this. I think it's not a waste of time, but I really don't know if A-League clubs should actually have academies with 12 and 13 or 13s and 14s and 15s, or maybe even 16s. I think it stretches clubs' resources. I think there's enough quality within the local NPL to develop kids. And then the A-League clubs can start to look at a broader range of kids, because I've seen so many kids come through academy systems, whether it be Adelaide United when I was there, or, obviously I coach in the NPL here in Brisbane, and I've got an association with the Brisbane Raw, and look at what they do. And there's more kids, the kids come out of the system and they go nowhere. They go into NPL and a lot of them end up losing interest in the game. Kids build their hopes up when they get taken into an A-League academy, and 4 years later, they're on the scrap heap, and it's like, well, do I really want to play NPL? The enthusiasm's almost gone. I think you're better off just leaving it with clubs and getting these kids to strive to get looked at at an A-League club at 18, for example. And in Australia, we are a country of late developers. We always have been. 18-year-old kids in Europe are so more advanced than 18-year-old kids here in Australia. And that's simply because of the level of competition. In Europe, you're a 16, 17-year-old, and there's another 100 kids you've got to compete against to get a look in. Here in Australia, you get into an academy, you play, that's it. And there might be better kids outside, and I'll be honest with you, I've seen better kids outside of A-League academies, yet they don't get a look in for whatever reason. And that gets back to the coaching structure. Sometimes it's easier just to stick with what you're comfortable with. And I've seen that happen a lot. And I've said years ago, actually, when I was coaching back in the NSL, you get into an academy, it's harder getting in than it is getting out, or harder getting out, than it is getting in. Once you get in, it becomes a comfort zone, and you just tend to move through it. And it shouldn't be like that.
I want to talk about comfort zones, Cozzy, and to all our viewers who might have joined us late and think that you've joined a youth development and coaching seminar. No, we are celebrating the 40-year anniversary of the Socceroos lifting the Malayan Cup in 1982 in Singapore, and we're reflecting back on that with our wonderful panellists led by head coach Les Scheinflug. But there were certain moments around that, and youth was one of them, and we've explored that a little bit, but Cozzy, you spoke about players being worldly and the different experiences, and I'm going to take you on a wild tangent here. How about your experience at the Malayan Cup? There was a beauty pageant. Were you aware of this?
I'd forgotten about it. I saw the footage.
I think blanked it out of your mind. So if we look here, and we can see Stefan Kamatz looking on intently, or Steve, as it were. There was a lovely lady chosen from each competing nation to be part of this beauty contest. Australia sent 2 women from Western Australia. I don't think Stefan actually picked either of them. But Cozzy, why weren't you on the judging panel with him?
I was married.
I'm pretty sure.
No, that didn't stop me. No, I'm glad I wasn't. It would have been too hard a decision. And I would have had to sit through that. It was hard enough sitting through the video that I got last week. Watching. Sitting through it live would have been torture.
I've got to say, Stefan, so wildly inappropriate, but so of that time. How did you end up as a guest judge?
Well, each of the heads of delegation became guest judges. I mean, Cozzy doesn't remember it because he wasn't asked to be a judge. But I actually did vote for one of the Australian girls, and she didn't win. So.
Oh, what a shame. I did love, though, there's a bit of...
Is that a surprise?
Stop it. There's a bit of commentary over that piece, and if you want to go and check it out, I think it's on Harry Michael's Facebook page, potentially. You listen to it, and it talks about Stefan sitting there as the guest judge, and you can hear him saying, 85, 62, 85 are down as her statistics.
I know. Yeah, not acceptable today.
What's that translating to in the inches, Stefan?
No, truly unacceptable. But again, one of those the things we look back at, and it was a sign of the times. Was the other off-field revelation a sign of the times as well? Because another diversion, Stefan, was not just the can you please be a guest judge in our beauty contest. You were getting calls about a little bit of on-the-side betting?
Yes, look, there was a lot of gambling going on around this particular competition, and there's a lot of gambling that goes on throughout Asia. I received 2 phone calls from a young lady asking if we would fix our game against Indonesia. And we weren't offered money, we were offered women.
Indeed, and I want to hear your reaction to this because you were interviewed about this at the time. Let's have a listen to that.
How come the players missed out?
Approached during the week, obviously because of the amount of betting that does go on these matches. And I personally have received 2 phone calls, both from ladies, offering me their bodies, if you like, in an attempt to get the players to throw the match. I find it ludicrous, really, because we don't experience this sort of thing in Australia. Apparently it's commonplace over here. And because there are hundreds of thousands and at times millions of dollars involved in the games, it's serious business. I had an approach from the CPIB 2 days ago, and I had to make a written statement to them on exactly what happened regarding the 2 phone calls, and they're treating the matter very seriously. But obviously, from our point of view, it's a little more light-hearted because it's a new experience to us. But I'm quite sure that any approaches that are made to the boys will just be laughed off. They're here to do a job, and we intend to make sure that that's accomplished.
So, Mitch, did he ever tell you that...
Is it true that they knocked you back? That's the reason it didn't go ahead?
Well, no, of course, that was the problem. They didn't tell the players the brief, and I ended up scoring 2 goals there against Indonesia.
Yeah. Look, it was interesting. this actually made the front pages of the Daily Mirror in Sydney. It was probably the first time that the late Tommy Anderson, the journalist and an ex-player and coach, had made the front pages of the Daily Mirror. And it actually made a book by Bob Bottom, right? Bob Bottom wrote on organised crime, and we actually appeared in his book. I received these calls, and we were asked to draw 0-0 with Indonesia because Indonesia had won their first game, and a draw would get them through to the semi-finals. I obviously was somewhat taken aback by this request, and I immediately reported it to the Singapore Federation, who then reported it to the Corrupt Practices Investigation Bureau, and I had to give a written statement. And I should say that other teams were approached because one of the players of another team who was alleged to have participated in this was sent home. Now, because they'd asked us to draw 0-0, the game's going on. I'm sitting on the bench near Les. And after 70 minutes, notwithstanding the fact that we're really on top in this game, it's 0-0. And I'm starting to panic because even though we haven't done anything wrong, I was concerned that perceptions would become reality, right? But thanks to Mitch here, he scored 2 goals within the space of 7 or 8 minutes, and we won 2-0. So I was relieved, right? The next morning, our physiotherapist, Charlie Urisic, who was a terrific physiotherapist, unfortunately he's no longer with us, he was also a comedian. And he said to me over breakfast, Steve, as it was then, Steve, there was a fellow looking for you last night. We couldn't find you. Where were you? And I said, I was in my room all night. Why didn't you ring me? He said, no, we couldn't find you. This fellow wanted you. And I said, well, why does he want me? And he said, well, he had a busload of women there for you. Right? By which stage, obviously, I'd realised he was taking the mickey out of me. But yeah, it was a strange experience. And yeah, thank goodness I've never had to go through that again.
The funny thing, he never told us anything. Not to Cozy, not to
Yeah,
David, not to
yeah,
the coach. He kept it for himself.
Yeah.
I was going to say, Dave Mitchell quite literally saved your blushes. So you knew nothing about this, Les?
Nothing at all.
Is that the best way it was?
It's the best way because they put extra pressure on you for if something goes wrong, like you said, 0-0 by accident. And they had bookmakers all over Singapore, Malaysia, and they were detected even in England at some stage. Their bookmakers, they were betting on games till they got detected.
Yeah.
Even the goalkeeper from England, Grobela, from Africa, you remember he was involved?
Yeah.
So.
I can see the
No,
sweat
we knew
breaking
about
out
it.
on James Johnson's brow. Please never have to
I
do
knew
that.
about it.
It didn't come from me because Les wouldn't
No,
allow
it
me.
didn't. We
He wouldn't
heard
allow
about
me.
it.
He wouldn't allow
We
me
had
to
a
talk to the
security guy. I
players.
can't
That's
remember
right.
his name now, but we had a security guy that
Yes.
worked with us, and because I got tapped up in the foyer
Yes. Yes.
of the hotel, and he was around, so we just spoke to him about it. We just laughed it off because it was never going to happen anyway, not from our perspective.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned one of your cast and crew that's passed away. There's actually 5 from that group that travelled that are no longer with us.
Yeah. Charlie, unfortunately, Roger Musgrove. 2 of the players. There's Phil O'Connor and Martin Crook. And the referee who travelled with us for that event was Tony Boscovich. So yes, unfortunately, those 5 are no longer with us, which is very sad.
You mentioned Martin Crook. I think he only conceded a couple of goals all tournament, didn't he?
Yeah, no, he was, at that stage, he was a good up and coming international goalkeeper. But we had so many good ones, you understand, really, in that era. You know, I went to Portugal, I had Kalac, I had Schwarzer, and I had Bosnich in the under 20. Can you ask for any more?
Yeah, spoilt for choice.
The only goals scored against us were in the final. The previous games we'd won without conceding any goals whatsoever.
You spoke about earlier when we were having a little bit of a chat about what sort of things you'd like to touch on. You all mentioned the DNA of the side, what it was intrinsic to this side that made you perhaps more powerful together as a collective. JJ, DNA is something we still talk about as being really important to our national teams.
Yeah, it is. And when you're competing against the best in the world, every percent makes a difference. And I think we saw that this year with the Socceroos when they faced off against the UAE and then Peru. I know a lot of the discussions that Graham had, that Timmy had when he came into camp, was all around the DNA of the team and how Australia plays at its best when they're the underdogs and they've got their backs to the wall. And I think we've seen time and time again throughout our history, even up to just a few months ago, that's what makes the Socceroos, and that's also what makes the Matildas in 2022.
Indeed, and the collective, I think, and we can include in that as part of our football family, the Pararoos and the Paramatildas, who will strive together to achieve that objective. Mitch, it was something particularly important to you, wasn't it, that the players, perhaps on their own, not all superstars, but together you formed a really good unit.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's like going back to Les's day. He had that interaction with players. He could smell a player if he wasn't bothered or if he was, and he'd come and talk to them, get in their head. As a coach, you have to be a bit of a psychologist and you have to try and get the best out of them. And Les certainly did that. And with the blend he was trying to do from not qualifying for the 82 World Cup and in this tournament in the Merlin Cup, myself and 3 or 4 other young boys were played there. He's bringing that into it. And, that gave him enthusiasm. And players like Cozzy, were looked up to from the younger boys because he was one of the stars of the league at the time. So it's a scenario where, we were playing and we're enthusiasm, and that gives you an injection to any team. And going there and giving the pride back in the shirt. And that's what Les was always, that pride in the shirt and playing for the Socceroos or Australian team or national team, whatever it may be, that you've got to have the pride to play for it. And, you could just see that all the things he's done within the game. And, even I didn't know his past history, which is a shame. But, he's one of the foremost coaches in Australian football that has been successful.
I've been in 2 games. In Mexico, where Frank Farina scored the equalizer in front of 100,000 people. You couldn't hear a word. You couldn't give instructions. We had to tell the physio to go on the park when somebody gets injured and give instructions. And then in Portugal, 118,000. The more people went against the Australian team, the bigger they grew, our boys. And one thing, where we made the mistake, we brought coaches in here that want to play their style from their own country, instead of letting us play our style, which is winning, going forward. All right, you learn to defend, which is part and parcel of knowledge. But this is our style. The Australian style is not to go back, go forward and score goals, get crosses in. And soccer hasn't changed that much. You have a look at even the top teams now. Suddenly they play with 3 in the back. We used to play with 3 in the back, 1 sweeper, 1 stopper, right? And the 2 fullbacks and 3 midfield players and 2 up front. Soccer hasn't changed that much. It's just the players you got of football. Yeah, the football. But I'm from the old era, you see, so it hasn't changed that much either.
But just that, we talk about, the 1%ers. Everyone talks about the 1%ers getting better. But you know what? Never forget the 95% that you got there as a core. That's, a lot of people forget that. You get all these 1%ers and forget that 95% core that you're talking about. And that you end up missing. So you start from 70% and go into these 1%ers. The core is the value of everything in the team.
Indeed. You mentioned the players looking up to Cozzy and his stature at the time. Stefan, what would they like to manage as a team? Were they rascals? I bet.
They were terrific, actually. I was thinking that, 1 or 2 of them, because they were stars, might be in love with themselves. But no, they were a terrific group to work with. They were fantastic. And of course, you have the boss next to me who was in charge, and they respected him, so they behaved themselves. So, it was terrific working with them at the time. I loved it.
You have no idea how often we sneaked out, so obviously we did a good job.
That's what he says there, but he was on the next plane home if I catch him.
The thing is, when you snuck out, you actually caught Les out with him as well. It was
Yeah,
all
but
in
you
the
got to
same
catch
bar.
me, Les. You never caught me.
You were too fast. Too fast.
Cosy, what Les has just said about the evolution of the game, but it's still actually the same game. Was that your experience? And you've watched Australian football through from coaches before Les Scheinflug and then through the different incarnations, if you like, or iterations afterwards. Has it changed that much? Are we still the same sort of players?
Look, I think the world of football is a lot more tactically aware than it used to be back in our day. If you look at the A-League, and Mitch touched on it before, that it's a lot more professional than the old NSL ever was. But if you look at the players in the NSL, they were virtually self-developed. They were self-taught. Training these days for young players is nothing like it was in ours. It's very, very structured. In our day, I guess there was a lot more like natural learning. It's because we basically played street football. I mean, Mitch, what did we do at training with Tomo? Yeah, we're a successful side with Sydney City, but we played five-a-side most of the time. You knew exactly what you were going to do, and it wasn't a free-for-all, but you're allowed to develop at your own pace. And I think we did that back in those days. Now it's a lot more complex for coaching kids. There's a lot more expectation of coaches. And football's become a business. And so there's also the commercial side of the game that you've got to look at. And I think that influences somehow the psychology and almost the philosophy of the game in this country as well. I mean, Jamie, you just rattled off a whole lot of metrics here, which I understand because you're on that side of the business. But none of it said about developing, who's going to be a good footballer and who's not. It was all about the commercial side of it. And you talked about national team stuff, like what you're going to do with the youth teams and all that sort of thing. That's not going to make us better players. The cream will always float to the top, and you'll get the good kids coming through that will be picked for the national team. But will they be as good as kids that were picked 20 years ago, that were more self-taught, that maybe had to do it a bit tougher? You got to get back to the basics, and you got to look at those million-odd kids that we've got playing the game. Where are they going to be in 5 years' time? Will they still be playing football? Or more importantly, how do we turn them into supporters if they're not playing? Or are they going to play over 35s or over 45s with their mates, but turn up and watch an A-League club or their local club on the weekend? That's what we're missing. Back in the old days, you got people that turned up and watched. Now you don't. At all levels of it. And, the old NSL clubs can always, in the NPLs in each state, always go on about how, we've disregarded old soccer, but they don't get the best roll-ups on a weekend either. It's not like they're outstripping the A-League for numbers by any stretch of the imagination.
What we all forgot, including Cosy, Mitchell, everybody, soccer is becoming more expensive for young players. And I think the government should help with the fees. Some of the clubs are charging $400, $500 for a kid to play. I would have never been the captain of Australia. My father didn't have that type of money, right?
It's 2,000 in some places.
And if you got 2 or 3 players from one family, we miss good players. And this has to come back in here. And like Cosy mentioned before, under Toma, you played five-a-side game. But what do? You play with the ball all the time. You get the touch, you get the feel, you get the first touch. And then you had some shooting practice on the end. So else, if you don't have shooting practice, you will never score goals. But these are...
I got a question.
Yeah.
So I got a question for Jamie, mate, because you would probably know this. And I was thinking about this the other night because I'm forever hearing that football costs too much. I've been involved with an NPL club and I can see where some of the money goes. But say a kid pays $3,000 to play for an NPL club. Can you actually break that down as to where every dollar goes? Are you able to do that? Are we in a situation to do that?
Yeah, the answer is yes, Cosy. The first thing I'd say, though, is when it comes to cost of football, it's a very blanket conversation at the moment. We really need to hone in on where the costs are. And if you look at the 2 million participants participating week in, week out, it's a small percentage of players that are paying the thousands of dollars every year. And this is an issue, and this is an issue that's specific to the elite clubs and the NPL clubs. If you look at the rest of the sport, though, my kids, for example, we pay $190 a year at Leichhardt Saints. It's not an NPL club. This is the sort of 98% of our participation base. It's pretty good. The costs are very high at the NPL, and we do have to solve this. The starting point for me is looking at how did we end up in this position. And for me, if you look at those NPL clubs and you look at how clubs generally generate revenue, normally clubs can attract sponsorship through a tiered system where they can move up in a pyramid, or they generate revenue through the development and on sale of players. And we don't yet have a full-fledged transfer system. So what's happened, I think, over the years with the NPL clubs is they've charged the parent because they're not able to actually create revenues for themselves. Now, is that right? No, it's not. But that seems to be the cause. So we do need to look at that and find ways to reduce the costs for clubs that are in that elite part of the pyramid. So yes, I agree with that. And we've got some initiatives that we're going to put on the table in 2023 about how we can reduce the cost for clubs at the elite level. To answer your second question, Cozzy, yes, when a player registers, when a parent signs the player up, what the parent will see is how much each level of the pyramid charges for cost. For Football Australia, some might be surprised. For junior players, we take $14 per participant. For senior players, it's $33. So it doesn't matter if it's $190 or $2,000. Our fees do not change. It's $14 for juniors, $33 for seniors. Where the costs increase is through associations, through member federations, and then the clubs themselves. But they are all broken down. It's transparent, and you see it as a parent when you sign your child up. But that's a new thing that we've brought in recent times.
See, just on top of that, I think
it's great.
Just, on top of that, but when a parent has had a kid at a club and they're paying $3,000 every year, then this kid goes overseas and plays, and then the club asks for $50,000 or $60,000 or $100,000 for development fees. Well, the parents have paid the development fees, so who should be getting the money back? The club or is it the players? And I know the clubs give the vehicle for that to go through, but must be somewhere. And that, like myself, I have to pay $30,000 to become a free player. Otherwise, they could ask $100,000 and stop your career going overseas.
Gents, I think there's a whole nother program we could probably do on the cost of playing, youth development and coaching structures, and we'll perhaps have to get you all back for this, gentlemen. But tonight, as we starting to run to the close of our hour, I just want to quickly reflect on how important it is to touch on our history, have these discussions, because we're learning from what we've seen in the past to create a better game in the future. And it's been very important. Les, you've seen so much in this great game, and we've had some reminders tonight. We've got another picture here of you. You're with one of the cameramen. I think it was against Argentina, that picture.
The cameraman, a nice man. I know him for 30 years, and I simply told him to make sure Harry Michael behaves himself, because he put his camera on me every time I smoked a cigarette, and there was a sign behind me from Winfield, smoking kills. Right, so he did it on purpose. I told him a few Greek words.
But so many moments, so many memories. How lovely is it to be able to relive some of them with your colleagues?
It's great. Soccer is a great game. So long as football. Let me do my way, because you call me old soccer. Right? I believe that so long as we believe more in the coaching staff we got in their country, and we give them a chance to coach this club, don't bring so many imports in there. If you want to send your good young coaches overseas to work 1 month with the top club, Manchester City or Barcelona or Madrid, do that. But don't bring those so-called has-been coaches over here for 2, 3, 4 years, and they achieve nothing. They leave us empty. And that's what happened too often with us.
Les Scheinflug, you've been such a wonderful servant to the game. So many wonderful memories you've given us over the years, and you continue to have these conversations with it. Thank you for looking back.
Only 50 years.
Thank you for looking back with pride on all of this. John Cosmina, thank you for joining us from Brisbane. Stefan, Big Steve Kamatz, great to have you here. Dave Mitchell, wonderful to see you. James Johnson, thank you for coming and giving us a feel for what the future looks like in football. Can we expect to be celebrating more of our great history?
Absolutely, we can, Steph. And I think if we're in the football industry, if you're in other sports, if you're in politics or business, history is important. And there's a lot of lessons that we can learn from our history. And specifically for our code, we have a magnificent history. And certainly with this new administration, history will be respected. It'll be respected more than it has in recent times, because history has got us to where we are, and history is part of our future. So history is part of Australian football and Football Australia going forward.
Wonderful to hear, and it's been so fabulous to hear everyone's thoughts tonight as we relive that wonderful victory of the Socceroos in Singapore in 1982, winning the first Merlion Cup. Just one of many special moments in our very rich tapestry of the game here in this country. Thank all of you for joining us. It's been great to have your company, and hopefully we'll see you again very soon. Good night.